Before we start, if you're enjoying these conversations, please make sure that you like or subscribe to Cleaning Up. It really helps other people to find us. Cleaning Up is brought to you by the Liebreich Foundation and the Gilardini Foundation. Hello, I'm Michael Liebreich, and this is Cleaning Up. My guest today is the Right Honourable William Russel, the 692nd Lord Mayor of London. Let's bring William Russel into the conversation. William, thank you very, very much for joining us here on Cleaning Up.
Michael, thank you for having me.
It's a great pleasure to see you in your official finery as Lord Mayor of London.
Well, occasionally I wear my badge, and for this interview podcast, I'm keen that I'm in the Mansion House wearing the Lord Mayor's finery.
And I'm such a stickler for formality, so no doubt that was one of the reasons why you wanted to make the commute in today to make sure you had all of the trappings of office.
Absolutely. Well, I've been here since April the 12th, Michael, leading from the front.
Very good, very good. And I hope that city workers are trickling back to their desks now that the summer is over.
They are, indeed they are. My benchmark is the Pret-a-Manger down the road, and 2 days ago they'd sold out of everything by 1 o'clock. So that's all you need to know.
Well, I think that's good news. Yes. As long as it wasn't the lorry drivers that couldn't replenish the shelves or whatever.
Absolutely.
Can we do this to get started? So, because we've got a very diverse audience around the world, and they won't all know what the Lord Mayor is. They won't necessarily know, and I know you've answered this question a million times, the difference between the Lord Mayor and the Mayor of London. And then if you explain, you are the 692nd in a long line that goes back to Dick Whittington and beyond. So if you could explain all of that as in the sort of short version, that would be very, very helpful, I think.
I'm happy to do so. So yes, as you said, I'm the 692nd Lord Mayor of the City of London. The mayoralty dates back to 1189. And my role is very much ambassador for financial and professional services for the whole of the UK that employs 2.3 million people, is 8% of our GDP and 11% of our tax take. And in a normal year, I'd travel 100 days a year around the world, probably to 30 different countries, and promoting this very important sector. However, this is not a normal year. In fact, it's not a normal 2 years, Michael. I am Lord Mayor for 2 years, and the last time that happened was 1861. There was a Lord Mayor called William Cubitt of Cubitt Town, who built Cubitt Town down in the Isle of Dogs and built Covent Garden, and it was his brother Tom Cubitt who built Belgravia. So it is a very different time, and he was given, by the way, a second go at being Lord Mayor because his largesse to the city was so great. They said give him another year, and I jokingly say I'm probably the cheapest Lord Mayor that there's ever been. However, you're absolutely right. I think it's 28 Lord Mayors since 1189 have done back-to-back years. But there's one Lord Mayor who did 4 years in total, who did that in 1397 and 1398. And yes, you're right, it was Dick Whittington. So I never thought I would have that in common with Dick Whittington, but I do. And I jokingly say, those who know the Dick Whittington story, I'm still looking for the cat to bring to the Mansion House. But to answer your other question about what's the difference between myself and Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, firstly, my mayoralty dates back to 1189, his doesn't. Secondly, he's elected every 4 years and looks after the whole of London, which is 9 million people. My territory, even though it is part of his territory really, but we work very closely together, is the square mile. And the closest comparison to the square mile of the City of London, I think, is probably the Vatican. We aren't as powerful as what they have in the Vatican, but that's the way I see it. And we have our own police force, and we're probably, one of the wealthiest local authorities in the world, let alone in the UK.
So I thank you for that. I could draw other differences between you and the Mayor of London. You are highly effective and competent, but let's move on. Now you are the champion for the City of London. What does that actually involve? Because, as I say, for most of our audience, they're sort of aware that it exists, probably don't know that much about the role of financial services or the financial sector in allocating resources, in managing risks, in financing things. And then why do you need to promote them at all? And why do you need to promote London?
A very good question. So, I mean, just to in partly answering that question, when I do travel the world, and whether it's Shanghai or America, many cities say, I wish we had the City of London Corporation, because what we do effectively, because we date back from such a long period, and the wealth we have is over hundreds of years, we, for free, promote financial and professional services, the ecosystem that we have here, whether it's the law firms, the rule of law, whether it's insurance, whether it's asset management. We're the second largest asset management center of the world after America, and insurance, Lloyd's. The Lloyd's insurance market is 29% of the GDP of the financial sector. Whether it's maritime, which people forget about, whether it's FinTech, whether it's now green finance, you know, we effectively promote that around the world. So, for example, I have done calls today with the regulator in Jakarta. I was in Thailand today talking about FinTech, and I was in Sydney first thing this morning, virtually, of course. But what we're doing is that, you know, our services and professional services are such a huge asset and such a huge export for us that that it's good that there's somebody, the titular head, out there promoting this sector for the UK, and hence part of the reason why we are where we are in the global financial world. I would say number 2 to New York at the moment, but we're looking very hard at how we're going to get that number 1 slot back.
Right, because we were number 1 for some, what was it, 6 or 8 years. Yes. We managed to get our nose out in front.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, look, Brexit has changed things a bit, but I mean, I can give you a very optimistic view of London and what we have here going forward. And you and I have got to know each other on the Board of Trade, but you know, a lot of it is around you know, carbon voluntary markets, the green finance, and the opportunities for London to really dominate that space with COP26 coming up.
And indeed, that's our paths crossed because of the Board of Trade, but actually they crossed from time to time before then, just talking about green finance, because you have really lent into the whole green finance and sustainable finance trend. I would say in a way that your predecessors, maybe the times were different, but they didn't really do that. I wasn't that aware of it, but you have been a huge champion for green finance. Do you want to talk through some of the things that you've done in that space?
Absolutely. So look, I mean, 2015, I took not a punt, but I made the decision that FinTech was going to be a big thing. It is enormous for us. And in a way, FinTech goes hand in glove with green tech and what's going to happen in green finance. And I think the city, as I look back in history, has always been able to innovate over the centuries. And just to give one more little sort of story or what's critical to the city is, and you know, I suspect all about the livery companies, but so everyone knows, the livery companies were the trading bodies of the city, and whether it's the fishmongers or the vintners or the butchers, and if you got your freedom of the city, it gave you a right to really trade in those sectors. And you were a freeman probably of one of the livery companies. So we've always been a trading city, and we've always adapted to what's gone on in the world, whether it's after the Fire of London, whether it's you know, after the Blitz, and here we are again. We're adapting after Brexit and around COVID. And COVID has enhanced our status as the FinTech centre of the world, in my opinion. And I generally believe that the delay of COP, as much as we didn't want any delays, and by the way, my sources tell me this one definitely isn't being delayed, so don't believe everything that you read in the papers, because I think that would be the wrong thing to do. But the delay in COP has helped us get our sort of act together even further. So when I became Lord Mayor in November 2019, COP was coming up in November 2020. I'd already sort of figured that this was going to be a big event, but it was a changing event in November 2020 that really focused my mind even more, and that was the Green Horizon Summit, which you and I spoke about, where we had over 90 countries represented. I co-hosted it here at the Mansion House with Mark Carney. And also Mark, being a long-term friend, has been very influential on me. In fact, I would always argue that the real influence on Mark Carney and myself is his wife, Diana Carney, who was way ahead of all of us when it came to the green agenda. But obviously he made that famous speech about the horizons, and that was a game-changing moment for financial services, because he was just pointing out, there's a disaster waiting to happen, and we need to look at resilience, look at risk, because it affects all of us, as you know too well. And one thing I will say to this audience is that what I've learned from Michael over the last year and a half, having got to know him, has been phenomenal. I'm still in awe of his knowledge of everything to do with the climate and climate change. So there's a plug for you, Michael, but I tell you, it is never a truer word. So I got into that space and just could see the effect. And then, the last event we had here was March 2020, which was hosting the Bushfires fundraiser. And we had the Bushfires, and you could see what was going on in the world, but you could also see the opportunities that there are for the city. And, whether it's around carbon markets, whether it's around, just green finance as a space. I mean, a lot of people focus on green bonds. Say, well, you haven't listed many green bonds here as Amsterdam. I said, it's not about green bonds. It's about the whole ecosystem. So my theory is very simple. We have this ecosystem, as I said, rule of law, asset management, insurance, maritime, everything's here. And what's going to happen is that ecosystem is going to be naturally green. It's going to turn green because this is the biggest opportunity of a generation. And they recognize it. And they're smart people here, all these companies. And it's happening as I speak. And funny enough, the professional services side, so the Deloittes, the KPMGs, the PwCs, they are massively influential in this because, of course, all these big corporates have them as advisors. And they want to say, what do we do? Because the first question every corporate is asking now is, what do I do about sustainability, green finance? Because this is going to be a much bigger event than anything we've seen around COVID-19. I know you and I have said that. You ain't seen nothing yet, which is a bit depressing, but we've just got to stop what we could go wrong in the future.
Right, so I'm basking in this. I'm enjoying it, partly because you said very nice things about me. There's me. I feel like I've been beavering away in this kind of clean, green finance, sustainability, net zero before it was called that, and so on. And so it's great to be able to kind of help in any way, but also because I founded New Energy Finance. It's now Bloomberg NEF, and it is the world's premier information provider, and I founded it in London, and so I'm part of that, or the thing that I created is very, very, very much part of that ecosystem. And right at the core, all the people you mentioned, when they work on clean energy, clean transportation, carbon finance, et cetera, they're all using the services. They're all relying on the team that I built. So I think that's absolutely. So
my obvious observation to you, Michael, is you sold out too early.
People ask me that a lot because the business has grown 10x since I sold it. I sold it very well. I spend some of my time in Switzerland. I had a lovely house in London, and I've been able to spend time with my family, with my father, who was not well when I sold, and so on. So do I have regrets? No, but there is part of me that thinks, damn, Michael, you'd make a fine billionaire. I'm young, you're young.
You've got lots of time to make the billion.
Maybe when you finish being Lord Mayor, we'll figure out some way to kind of correct this huge injustice that I'm not one. Because just to recap, just before we go back onto green finance, because you are a practitioner in finance, you're a thoroughbred. You're not somebody who has come through the political system to represent effectively a borough of London, which happens to be the city. You are a financier, are you not?
Yes, so I started my career at First Boston, aging myself, in 1987. I was at Durham University, and then I went to Merrill Lynch. I always worked for the Americans. I worked out quite early on the meritocracy of the American society and American corporate world. If you do a good job, we'll pay you whatever it takes. And that was great. And I left Merrill Lynch in 2006. I jokingly say, because I could see what was coming. I think it was more to do with wanting to see my children more like yourself and enjoy their schooling and go to the sports field and stand on the touchline and annoy them. They humoured their father very well, my boys and my daughter. But no, so I have, and I do think this role has changed, where you do need to know a little bit or a lot about financial sector. However, the privilege of being Lord Mayor is you learn a hell of a lot on the job. And that's fascinating because you meet so many interesting people, and you being one of them, but of course we joke about our new friend Tony Abbott, and all that. That if you like people and you want to learn and more about so many different things in life, then that is great. But I think that probably the people often ask me, what as Lord Mayor is the one major thing that you feel is important, and it's that soft convening power, and that is difficult to articulate or put something value on it, or tangible value, but it is that network. You are bringing people together. I always say I open the door, I take people through the door into the room, and then I leave them to do the deals, because you can't go too far to the weeds, so to speak. But I think it's huge. And the convening power is one of the big game changers as Lord Mayor, because people wanted to come to the Mansion House. And if you write them a letter and say, I'd like to meet you, more often than not, they find the time and say yes. So you can make a big difference that way. And 2 years, in a way, has made that easier. I mean, and 1 year, you're just running. I've done 3,000 Zoom calls since March 2020, and you're just running, and I'm Zooming, and it's fine, because now I've gone back to hybrid, and I find it very useful, because I've probably genuinely reached more people than any other Lord Mayor in the history of the mayoralty, and that's a lot of it's to do with what we're doing now. Here I am doing a podcast, and it goes to 250 people who didn't even know about the Lord Mayor, may never have met a Lord Mayor.
Well, and sorry, just to be sure, that's 250 or so on YouTube, and an awful lot more via the podcast.
There we go.
It should be well into the thousands.
I love it.
We're getting a growing audience that's well into the thousands. Just a bit of context there. You mentioned Tony Abbott. I forgot to mention to our audience that you and I sit on, well, actually, I think you mentioned it. We sit on the Board of Trade. That behind me is a report, I love it. Great positioning. We all worked on. And what was fabulous about it was that Tony Abbott, the former PM of Australia, who's also on an advisor to the Board of Trade, just like you and me, was sort of, there was this kind of, I don't want to say a fake conflict, but there was a sort of oppositionality set up by the whole system. It's like, we'll never get agreement. And actually, we worked very well. And I think that's a better report for the challenge that we brought, pushing the green finance and services side of things, and that Tony brought with obviously a more kind of purist, slightly libertarian, trade-based view. And it is a good report. So we're going to put a link into the show notes. And Tony was on the show 2 weeks ago. Yeah. I want to ask you something, though. I don't know if they've finished yet, but certainly a few days ago, we had Extinction Rebellion, who decided that the number one target that they had to hit was the City of London. And, I certainly, when I look at the push for clean finance, green finance, whether it's green bonds or whether it's whatever it is, and those services from the ecosystem, I can't conceive of how we're going to address climate change without that system being supported, redirected maybe in the right direction, or in fact, not maybe, redirected to finance the right things. But if we just think we can break that system and somehow deal with climate change, to me, that seems completely absurd. It's a very leading question, but I'm going to say,
No, but I agree with you 100%, because so literally I'm here in the Venetian parlour in the office, outside the window where just there, we were Extinction Rebellion all last week. And there was a side of me that wanted to sort of get on my microphone and go and talk to them and say, look, have you heard of this word transition? You can't get us to just dump all these oil stocks and all these assets. We need to help them transition to the right position, because if we did that, BP, and I always use Royal Dutch Shell, would be in dire straits because no one owns their shares, and it's this transition. And I've had a call, and you've probably met him, but it's worth getting on your podcast actually, Bernard Looney, the CEO of BP, and what he's doing. And I had a 40 minutes with him, and it's absolutely fascinating. He is genuinely making this transition. Now, not everyone's going to agree with it, but you can already see that EBITDA that he's generating from fossil fuel is being reinvested into renewables, etc., because there is this transition. So I totally agree with you, and I know that Mark Carney agrees with you, and I know Mark Carney has had their meetings with Greta Thunberg, and that's where their difference is. Even though I think Extinction Rebellion, Greta have what they've done is highlighted, and people are more aware of climate change. Doesn't necessarily agree with the way they go about it, but it's also quite interesting how with COP coming up, we've got GFANZ coming, and there are a couple of big financial institutions that haven't joined yet, and one of them was targeted by Extinction Rebellion, and there's this sort of the pressure is on, and I don't obviously in any way condone the way they've gone about it. However, they got a lot of publicity. They've got a lot of it's highlighted a lot of the issues that you and I talk about, and as I said, the transition is a critical path to getting where we're getting to. And you're absolutely right about finance. And the phrase I use, or have been using since I gave a lecture back in February 2020, is greening finance, financing green. And we'll get to the day one day when the word green won't be there. Every single aspect of finance is green. And it has to be, because that's the only way we're going to get the trillions of dollars that we've got to spend to get to where we need to get to by 2050.
Well, you've sort of done my segue for me, because my next question was going to be about how do you think about sustainable finance? Is it an asset class? Because you said there's fintech, and then that leads into green, but we've also got maritime, and we've got this and we've got that. Is it then a category of finance, or a sector, or a set of products? Or, and you've already sort of answered it, you started your answer at least, is it just everything has to take that into account, and everything, just as, there are now very few internet companies. There was a time when internet was a category and a sector and a class. And of course, all of that, frankly, a lot of that went horribly wrong, because in the end, the internet is everything we do. This is the internet. We are on the internet right now, but it's not called that anymore. So will green finance just be called finance?
Yes, definitely. And it's already happening. So if I talk to, some of the big private equity firms like KKR, when they invest in a business, and let's say they take a 5-8 year view, they want to be able to sell that business if it's not sustainable when they invest in the first place. So everyone is thinking about it, and they're thinking about it in every part of the world. But here today, I did a fascinating call with the Indonesian Investment Authority. Now, they've set up a sovereign wealth fund. It's literally 137 days old. But what's fascinating about that is, they're getting, some money from obviously the Indonesian government, but other people. And my view is, the opportunity is their first investments are going to be infrastructure in Indonesia, and they're trying to do it in a sustainable way. But think about the amount of money that we could put in the Indonesian Investment Authority, get a return on it, but all that money is going to make Indonesia a greener, more sustainable country. This is how it's going to happen. And I, as I said, I think we're moving very quickly down that road. We can always move quicker, but you're absolutely right. I don't know when the day will be when we can turn around and just say, finance, it's all going to be sustainable finance. We're getting quite close, It's not a separate asset class anymore. And every fund is going to have to look at themselves and say, we just can no longer invest in companies that aren't doing what they should be doing around sustainability.
Okay, we'll get back to how you tell whether companies are doing what they should be doing with respect to sustainability and all of the metrics and methodologies. Indonesia is a fantastic example, because going into COP, we've calculated, my team and I have calculated, that the net zero pledges, brackets, which aren't yet actions or laws, but they're pledges, it's a start, they cover 80% of the global economy. So it's hugely impressive, way beyond Paris. However, they only cover 40% of the world's population. And it is places like Indonesia, Malaysia, India, and a lot of Africa that are not yet on track for net zero. And so that, I don't know what we can do.
So I think before COP we'll get some.
Right.
I think we're going to get some before COP. So look, on some of the calls, the surprise about it, if I said to you Singapore hasn't made a net zero commitment. You probably know that. A lot of people on this call don't. Of all the financial centres, I was really surprised to discover that.
Here they have made a soft commitment, I believe.
Well, they've said we will.
They have declared an intention.
No, I know,
they have
but
not made a commitment.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Something like that.
I'm sorry, we could all declare an intention. I mean, we want, at least we've gone to 2050 here in the UK. China's gone to 2060.
Well, the thing is, ours is also, it is in law. It is enshrined. So it is a very different kettle of fish to China's long-term intention.
But what I'm saying to my friends in Singapore is, here you are, you're looking at the carbon voluntary markets, you're doing this, you're doing that, but you haven't made a net zero commitment. It just doesn't add up. How can you, if people really want to take you seriously around the markets that you're trying to do, you should make those commitments.
Funny, I had the same conversation with that very nice Tony Abbott 2 weeks ago.
Australia. Well, you've just seen the news. You've just seen the news today in the free trade agreement, where the hiccup has been exactly what you and I,
To be honest, that for me is a non-story. Why would you put a temperature into a trade deal?
I agree.
There's no sense at all. The intention to be in line with Paris was enshrined in the deal. That's enough. So I'm absolutely with Tony on that one, to be quite honest, if it is what it seems. It seems to be somebody just troublemaking, to be honest, leaking the story. But what do we say? Okay, you're very optimistic and that's good. But what do you say to the people who say, it's all great, fine, but it's not fast enough?
No, I agree.
For one of the reasons, we have to halve the emissions by 2030. Halving the emissions by 2030 is not, none of them, not Bernard Looney. And by the way, I had his boss, or his former boss. I had Lord Brown on a month ago. That's the person who started that process at BP. But those things are happening. So we've got a lot of movement, even from European oil and gas companies. But as a global financial system, we are still financing a lot of things that are not consistent with, net zero 2050 requires halving emissions by 2030. And I'm guessing we're going to be, I used to think 5-7% down on the peak. We're basically at peak now. I now think we might get to, let's call it 15 or 20% down in terms of emissions by 2030. And I think that's reasonably optimistic based on trends.
I agree.
So it's not fast enough.
No, I agree. Problem is, I agree. And you can ask me a question. We can keep pushing, keep doing what we're trying to do, lead by example here in the UK with COP26. And some of the statements that are coming out, but we just have to keep at it. Now, you know more about this, so I now reverse it. I shouldn't be asking you questions, but I am, and I think you and I have talked, but I am a fan of a carbon tax. I think what the EU doing on this carbon border tax is going to force businesses to adapt, and the market will have to adapt. But I'm not sure whether that's going to be enough to get us moving more quickly. But no, look, I agree. We're out doing our bit, saying what we should be doing, but it has to come from governments to lead the way. You and I aren't going to be able to. We can still shout and scream from the rooftops, but I agree. It's got to be quick. Today I heard Indonesia that if they do make a commitment, it's going to be 2065, 2070. Well, I'm sorry. That's just, I hope I'm wrong on that, but I hope it's going to be earlier than that. So our challenge is to get to China to come forward. Our challenge is to get China to change their view on coal-fired power stations. Their peak is 2030. How can we get them forward to 2026? So we're still, there's good momentum, as you and I know, but it's a tough one to really get countries to move faster forward.
Yes, and my suspicion and what I hope is that as soon as you sort of state a year, it ends up coming forwards because, once the businesses and the financiers of the polluting of the fossil resources, once they kind of know that the gig's up, then it comes forward. If you look at the UK, we were going for an 80% reduction by 2050, and then it was upped under Theresa May, and that's now been locked in by the current government. And it's 100% net zero by 2050, but the costs as calculated by the Climate Change Committee are no higher. Because once everybody puts their mind to it and we start really pushing down the costs of capital through that ecosystem and so on, it doesn't end up being more difficult. So now I promised to come back to a question of these methodologies and how do we know? Because I've done a deep dive into this. First of all, there are 55 organizations that are working on the greening of finance globally. That doesn't even include national bodies, regional bodies, academics working on it, think tanks. There are hundreds and hundreds of others. And they all think they've got the sort of golden, the I don't know what you'd call it, the key to the golden or to the green golden kingdom. They've all got their methodologies. They've all got their networks. They've all got their trillions that they claim to be following them. It's very confusing, is it not? Do you keep track of them all?
No, the answer is I don't think we do. What is fascinating, and this is just a small snippet of what running into COP. We at the City of London, which I've told you, Michael, we've created the GHS at COP26 brand, and we've got the rotunda, the south side of the Clyde, overlooking the actual site, and. We went out to some of the partners in the different sectors which I've described, and talk about oversubscription. Everyone wants to be involved, so it comes back to we know everyone wants to be involved, and what I'm hoping comes out of COP. And for us, there's sort of four big questions which I'll share with you, which I may have done before. But firstly, how can we finance both transition and growth? Picking up issues like engagement versus divestment, coming back to the comments I made about Extinction Rebellion. And then how can we build this global rule book for sustainable finance? I mean, that is critical. Everyone, and I'm hearing that there's some positive things moving slowly with the IRFS, that's it, in America. And I was it the IFRS anyway.
IFRS. IFRS. That's the accountancy body.
Yeah, the accountancy. So there's some positive things going there because we need to talk about this global rule book. And on a call I was on the other day, and then how can we price carbon and nature, because they're finance and biodiversity are, in my view, are very much work hand in hand. And then the fourth question is around meeting the 100 billion funding gap, which you and I know is not nearly enough, and it's going to have to be trillions, not 100 billion. But coming back to the question of the various areas. So I could read you some of our major sponsors. So Aon is one of our major sponsors at COP. That covers insurance. BlackRock, the biggest asset manager. The London Stock Exchange Group, which owns Refinitiv. And obviously, I know you sold your business to Bloomberg, but it's all about data, and that data is going to be critical for everybody. And the more we can do that, the better. And then Phoenix Group, which is people know as a big life assurance company, NatWest Group, one of our big banks, and then Standard Chartered covers a lot of the emerging markets. So there's an example, but we've got lots of other partners, and they all want to be involved, particularly around asset management, etc. So I don't think we monitor what everyone's doing. Partly, but coming back to my original point, is that I think the market's going to force them to get to where we need them to get to. However, we need to help the market by coming up with these rule books and standards, and that's what everyone is telling us. And I hope that out of COP some of that happens.
Okay, but so you've got everybody in the room, all the right people. Yeah. Are they clamoring to be regulated, or are they claiming to the contrary, you don't need to regulate us because it's going to happen anyway, or we can self-regulate? Which way is it going to go?
If I was guessing, I think they're clamoring to be regulated.
Okay, that's a surprising
I just think
answer,
because if you don't have that, you're going to have people going off in different directions. I think the regulators have a big part to play in this, because if we can have that regulation, that rule book, then they've got to follow it. And that's leadership for me. Otherwise, they're all going to go off in different directions. And just talk to the FCA. If you don't regulate financial services, you've got rogue, and that's the problem. We're going to have the rogue ones, greenwashing, which, it has become, you saw the news with DWS and all that. And the market, they're going to be, people are going to pick every companies up on whether they're getting it wrong or right. And if regulators aren't there watching it, they'll take advantage of it. You know what goes on in the financial world.
Right. There will tend to be a competitive race, and it'll be a race to the bottom, not necessarily a race to. There may be a sector that races to the top, but it won't be universal. Yeah. I think one thing you said that was very interesting was IFRS. I actually did a deep dive into finance a couple of months ago for Bloomberg NEF, one of the pieces I wrote, and I was really struck by the importance of the it's gap accounting in the US, which is slightly behind the IFRS, which are really starting to put climate risks, demand that they be put onto balance sheets.
Yes.
And it strikes me that there is nothing that will get action faster than a big write-off in the value of your hotel chain, your refinery, your shipping company, whatever it is, because you're being left behind. Either you're being left behind by a trend, or you're actually at physical risk because of the changing climate. So the accountancy moves strike me as being hugely important, but not sufficient, particularly for things like the asset management sector or some of the other sectors in your ecosystem.
I think that's right. We've already started to see that with the fossil fuel companies. I mean, BP have already written off, as of Shell, some stranded assets, knowing that that's the way the things are headed. So they're starting the process. It's easier, fossil fuels because of what's going on. But I totally agree. I think that's going to happen more and more with companies. They've got to look at those assets and say, and if that means doing things on the balance sheet to make that call, I think that's great.
Yes, and I think that's very much on track to drive the change. I think in terms of the regulations around portfolios, and I think the disclosure, having to disclose is kind of, absolutely we should push, and that should be regulated because otherwise people won't. But it's very difficult. I've looked at the methodologies for counting the carbon and climate impact of portfolios, and they all use scope 3. And there's all huge double counting, triple counting, quadruple counting, infinite counting, and then forget, once you get into the area of derivatives, all the calls and the puts and the CDRs and etc. To me, that's not on track. There's vast confusion.
Well, even more reason for that global rule book. Even more reason for that global rule book.
Yes.
And that's where it's really important. But look, it is. There is this momentum. So a big insurance company told me the other day they've saved £200 million not flying around the world because of COVID. So COVID has helped us here. There's no doubt about it. And, there's a reason why British Airways are looking at doing a low-cost airline out of Gatwick, because they're working out business travel ain't coming back as fast as we all thought. Because one of the big firms, has got to justify their carbon footprint. And they could say, well, we aren't flying around the world anymore. We've just saved, not only is it good for the bottom line, but it's good for the messages to their shareholders, what they're doing, one of the things they're doing around climate change. So, it's very interesting. As you can tell, I'm always optimistic, but I'm also realistic. And I'm one of those people that out of tragedy, there's always some good, but you may not see it straight away. And actually, I think COVID-19 has totally focused our minds on the subject that we're talking about. And I remember Gillian Tett saying that, and she good for her, she admitted the mistake. She said, when COVID happened, I said, this is going to be like the financial crisis of 0809. Climate change is going to go to the back burner and they're just going to focus on this. And she said, I was totally wrong. She said, actually, it was the complete opposite.
And Gillian Tett, for our audience, that's the Financial Times, the doyen of journalism, of diary journalism in the Financial Times. And, it's absolutely provably true what she says, or at least not what she said at the time, but the fact that I was expecting renewable energy to go to the back burner, electric vehicles to go to the back burner. And what we've seen is an enormous uptake. So what's very fascinating is that if you go back to the great financial crisis, in a crisis, people avoid risk. They stop doing the risky stuff and they go back to what they're comfortable with. And in the great financial crisis, that was fossil cars, fossil energy. And in the COVID financial crisis, the risky thing was actually the fossil thing, fossil energy, fossil cars. And so actually it's accelerated the transition, and it's provided new electronic services, things like Zoom and
exactly, the digitization.
So it actually has definitely accelerated a transition towards cleaner, not fast enough.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
We are 2 months away from COP. You are working frantically on your preparations. I'm working frantically on preparations for the Climate Action Solutions Centre, which is what we're doing at the Country House at the Blair Estate outside Glasgow. Our paths are going to cross. I'm going to thank you for the time you've spent with us here today. I wish you luck in your preparations for November. It is going to be in person, and it is going to be a huge and vast success. And I look forward to being part of your agenda and also drawing you in so that you can be part of ours.
Vice versa, and thank you for having me on, Michael. And I'm sure we'll be able to find time to have a wee dram in Glasgow.
You could say another wee dram. I've been. There was a tremendous Board of Trade meeting in Glasgow where we visited the shipyard, and it was a tremendous thing. So I think we've laid some good groundwork for an excellent COP26 in Glasgow in November.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for having me, and it's been great to talk to you as always, and look forward to catching up soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, William. So that was William Russel, 692nd Lord Mayor of London. My guest next week on Cleaning Up will be Julie Klinger. She's the Assistant Professor of Geography at the University of Delaware and a global authority on the geopolitics of rare earth metals. Please join me at this time next week for another episode of Cleaning Up.